Welcome to the Nature Here TV show. Today's guest speaker is Dr. Peter Lent, and he'll be talking to us about the African rhinos. Dr. Lent, could you give us a brief bio about yourself?
Thank you, Heather. Well, I'll make it very brief. As a young man, very young man, I went off to Alaska to study at the tiny University of Alaska, and then I went on to work in the Arctic, doing research for my PhD studies with caribou. Got my PhD at the University of Alberta, where there was also great interest in the Arctic, and did most of my subsequent work with large mammal ecology in the Alaskan Arctic. But having a yen for travel, I also took a chance to go off to Africa, Southern Africa, and that's where I met my wife, who is a South African. We met in the country of Lesotho, and subsequently we both came back to the US. But in the late 90s, we had a chance to go back to South Africa to work there with the new South African government, and that's what we'll be talking about later.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Lent will be giving us a presentation today, and it's called The Hook-Lipped Rhinoceros of the Great Fish River Nature Reserve. Dr. Lent?
Thank you. Well, here we start off with the start of the show, the hook-lipped rhino, commonly known as the black rhino, and uncommonly known as Rhinoceros bicornis minor, the Latin name. The bicornis part you can see, the two horns. And this rhino is a browser, and you can see some of that browse hanging from the hooked lips. It's specialized for browsing on shrubs, eating twigs and green leaves as it comes off. Another thing I'll mention about this particular rhino, you'll see the unusual nature of its ears. Well, the ears have been notched. That's not a natural condition. We'll talk more about that later. So this is a gray rhino, despite the fact that it's called a black rhino.
And it has a very long name.
Yes. And this one is called commonly the white rhino, but again, as you can see, it's definitely gray. And more properly maybe called the broad-lipped rhino. You can see them broad-mouthed down there, and this is a grazer. It's eating grasses close to the ground. In fact, I like to call this the lawnmower rhino. Yeah, so this is the larger of the two species in Africa, and it runs well over 3,000 pounds for a big adult. The horns, unfortunately for it, are also larger, and this is the rhino that is subject to most of the poaching going on in Africa today. In fact, in one year where I looked at the statistics, about 450 rhinos were poached in South Africa. Terrible toll, but of that toll, only about 15 were the black or hook-lipped rhino that we're talking about today.
Is this one poached more because of its size?
Partly that, but also because it's a grazer and it spends a lot of time out in open grassy terrain.
So easier to poach?
Yeah, easier to poach, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, so although there are more of these in South Africa, there's I think roughly 18,000 in South Africa compared to maybe 5,000 of the black rhino, but by far and away the great toll of this terrible poaching is on the
the easier ones to get after, is the ones that seems to be
that's basically the problem.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's a map of South Africa, and the area I'm talking about today is down there where you see that blue star in the lower right-hand corner. Might just also refer to the green area up in the upper right-hand corner in the northern part of South Africa. That is Kruger National Park. And almost all the tourists that come to South Africa to see wildlife end up going at least part of the time to Kruger. Extremely popular. I would guess that for every one tourist that makes their way to the Great Fish River Nature Reserve, probably 1,000 go to Kruger. Unfortunately, that's also true of the poaching. A good deal of the poaching takes place in Kruger National Park. This is because poachers are infiltrating from Mozambique, that country that you see just in the upper, to the right of Kruger National Park, to the east of it. That's the biggest problem, poachers coming in from there.
Now that park, why is that such a common place for people to go? Is it just a large safari park, or just Is it just the
Yes,
rhinos
it
in
is.
general?
It is a very large park. It's, for example, much larger than Yellowstone National Park, and it's part of a national park system. So it's just, yeah, and it's close to Johannesburg, which is where most of the
People come when
people
they come to
fly in.
visit.
That's where
Okay.
most of the planes come in. So those combination things, yeah. So yeah, this is now the Great Fish River Nature Reserve, as its current name is. It's changed its name a couple of times. Relatively small, 100,000 acres is a little more than half of the size of Crater National Park, for example. But it's sufficient to sustain viable populations of many large mammals, about 100,000 acres. And it's down in the southeastern part of South Africa in what's called the Eastern Cape Province, about 50 miles from the ocean. Eastern Cape Province is one of the poorer provinces in the country. So this is a provincial reserve as opposed to a national park. And that's me on the right there, as you can see. And Brad Fike is the man on the left, and he's the one that's been largely responsible for this long and successful story of increasing a rhino population here on this small reserve. Here we are dealing with an animal that's immobilized, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. If I'm looking around rather warily in that picture, that's because there was another rhino in the area which hadn't been immobilized. The black device I'm holding in my hand is a scanner for reading the numbers on microchips that we're putting in each of these animals. Talk more about that later. So my role here since about the year 2000 has been helping with research, doing research here, publishing many research papers, but also helping with the monitoring program. By monitoring program, we mean long-term effort to collect data about these rhinos and about their habitat, vegetation, and this is probably the best database about black rhinos anywhere in Africa.
I'm sorry, when you go there, do you see a lot of them right off the bat?
Well,
I mean, does
I was
it
going
take?
to mention that. This again, the reason I do so well is here, it's very dense vegetation, as we'll see in another slide. So they're often out of sight. And of course, we had to use a helicopter here to dart this animal. Outside of the reserve, this is what it looks like, especially in the north and east. These are rural villages. The people living here are the Xhosa people, very poor in these rural areas, high unemployment, and mostly based locally on some agriculture, especially cattle, to secondary extent, goats and sheep. And this is one of the local boys out herding. These are called Nguni cattle. They're basically the original breed of cattle that people had in Africa before Europeans brought in their breeds.
Do they welcome you when you come there? Are they worried about the rhinoceroses like we are?
Well, they'd be worried if any of them got, yes. And the sad story is that most Africans, poorer people in these villages, never get to see much wildlife. They never get to the parks and reserves. So yes, when they do get there, they're quite amazed. And they think that, oh, they should all be behind, or they expect them to be all more like a zoo. So
Right,
it's quite a
captured.
surprise to them, yeah. So this is, like I said, a poor community, and there's lots of use of animal traction here still. This is a man waving to us, pulled on a little cart by a couple of burros, and he's taking home firewood. Although electricity is generally available to villages here, firewood is cheaper, especially for cooking on. And in addition, around the reserve and elsewhere in South Africa, there are a large number of privately owned farms, which are now game farms. And this is the different in wildlife management in South Africa compared to the US. In South Africa, it's possible to own game animals, even own your own giraffes or elephants or rhinos, if you meet certain conditions in terms of having space available and having a proper fencing around your farm. So this has become a big industry. It's more money to be made by having a game reserve, bringing foreign visitors there to often luxurious accommodations. And they're also important for trophy hunting, which is very important to the economy of rural South Africa. Many foreigners come over for trophies to take home. This area is particularly useful in that sense. Also game animals, it's possible to sell them, possible to sell their meat and other products from the animal. There's no laws against that. So it's a major part of the economy in a country like South Africa and Namibia.
It wouldn't seem like just anybody could own a game reserve. I think it would be very expensive and extensive
Well,
at the
yes,
least.
that's true. And the one I just showed was actually largely owned by Americans who invest in it.
That's what I was going to ask. So
Not all of them, but yeah. And some of them have people made I know another one where the people made their money in diamond mining and decided to buy a game farm. So yeah.
okay.
And, but all this requires very good fencing, as I mentioned. This is the fencing on the reserve itself. Obviously, you want to keep the animals, the wild animals, inside, but you also want to keep livestock out. This is especially important because cattle can bring in diseases which can be contracted by wild animals, or dogs into wild dogs, for example. So fencing is very important. This actual fencing on the reserve was built to withstand elephants, to keep elephants in the reserve, but they have not yet introduced elephants into the reserve. But it is electrified for that purpose.
So just so that I'm kind of on the same page with the reserve, I know sometimes if I've gone to a website, we've looked up like an African safari, stay or something like that, and it is very elaborate. Is this the kind of place that these people would be staying at?
Most of that would be in private reserves, although some of the national parks have some pretty good...
Okay, so not all of them would be something that's necessarily a negative.
And one of the problems is this is a poor provincial, relatively poorly funded provincial reserve, and they have some accommodations, but the system is not run very well. It's run by the provincial government. So yeah, people would stay on one of the nearby private reserves or private accommodations and just visit for the day, typically.
Okay.
So, and also the vegetation I mentioned is highly suited for the black rhino because it's dense, brushy, spiny, thorny stuff, difficult to even get through at times and difficult to see what's going on. Aloes are lots of succulent, a very unique vegetation, which I hardly recommend anyone interested in plants visiting. Along the Great Fish River, what you see here, there is actually some forest, typically real trees with patches of small grassland. And the only large mammal that survived in this part of South Africa through the 19th century was the greater kudu, seen here. And this is because the kudu survived in small numbers, was not hunted out because of its habit of hiding in thicket like this, dense brush. All the other large mammals in this particular part of South Africa were exterminated by hunters, mainly European early settlers in the 19th century. So they all had to be reintroduced.
You can barely see that animal in the brush there.
Yeah, that's
amazing.
Does very well, and yeah. But here's a kudu, or you can see quite well. A beautiful animal, one that tourists all like to see when they come. Unfortunately, it's also a very popular one with trophy hunters, as you can imagine. People brag about having those horns on their wall.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
Very beautiful animal. And also the meat is very good eating, and that was really the problem with its early overhunting was meat is excellent venison. Okay, this is the red hartebeest, one that was reintroduced in early part of this century. A large antelope species, maybe a little bit smaller than our elk. This one, the hippo, never occurred in very big numbers, but it was exterminated very early on in this area from the Great Fish River, probably as early as about the 1860s, reintroduced, but still in small numbers. African buffalo, or Cape buffalo as called in this area, is one of the most important to be reintroduced because it's of great economic importance. It's valuable because within the Great Fish River Nature Reserve, it is disease-free population, and that's very important. Live animals can be captured and sold for auction, and that's a major source of income for the provincial reserves. Yeah, one of the nicest one of my favorites is the eland. This is a beautiful male. You can see from that big dewlap hanging down from its neck. Okay, like I said, the elephant wasn't reintroduced, not yet. I took this picture at a nearby small national park called Addo National Park. And I just like this one because you can see how a young rhino learns what's good to eat. What better way than stealing it from your mother's trunk before it reaches her mouth.
That is a great picture. How sweet is that?
Yeah. Okay, so this is why it's hard to see rhinos on the Great Fish River Reserve sometimes. Look at the density of that shrubby vegetation. Very difficult in some areas to get around in the reserve. And that's about the black rhinos. Great, they love it. They love it. So when we're working with the rhinos, it requires a lot of use of helicopters. This one had just returned from darting and immobilizing a rhino. The door was taken off so that the gunner, or the man with the dart gun at least, could get a clear shot at an animal. And in this case, the pilot was about ready to go back to town to refuel, and there were some college students, actually. These are American students who have been visiting, and he offered to give these young ladies a ride back to town. Oops, sorry. So this is what it looks like when the man is darting a rhino from the air. This one is actually well out in the open, which doesn't always occur. So the animal is immobilized with a dart in it. Then the helicopter lands nearby if possible, and the crew jumps out and runs to start working with the animal.
How long are they immobilized for?
Well, these modern drugs, they can stay down quite a while because you have basically an antidote that you give when you're ready for the animal to come out of it.
Okay, so it'll keep you down long
keep
enough
it down,
until you're
then you
finished
give
doing all the data
give
that you need to get on it.
And then you run.
Oh.
Get out of the way. Right. Get back to that helicopter. So here we are with one that's down. That's Brad Fike again on the left. And notice, I want to note first the blindfold that's put over the rhino's eyes. There's usually cotton put in its ears too, just to cut down on the stimuli that are reaching it while it's immobilized. He is drilling holes into the horn and inserting little microchips into the horns and then carefully sealing it over. The purpose of this is that if the animal is poached and the horn is cut off, it's possible the horn will be recovered by law enforcement. Then they would be able to track from reading the microchip back to where that animal came from, a database there. It's largely the same thing that we use in this country. For example, if you have a pet, you can have one of these little
Microchips put in to keep track of if you lose them, and that's really smart to put it in the horn.
Yeah, so they've adopted it for rhinos, not as pets, but as wild animals.
How long does it take you to get that information from rhino?
It's usually a half an hour to an hour that we're working with the animal. And half an hour try to do it. And you notice that the ears are being notched. That's why those forceps are there. And this is the type of information that we collect. In this case, okay, the lower right-hand corner, the numbers for each of those microchips that have been put in the animal. Another purpose of that is if an animal does die in thick brush and the carcass is not found, may be found much later on, and may be able to identify the individual from those microchips that are still with it. The ears are notched according to a numbering system that will allow us to individually identify up to about 200 animals. We collect other information, DNA samples well, that's actually the ear tissue, the lobe that's taken out of one of the ears, and other information about possible damage, injury, or abnormalities to the animal when it's handled, and that it's allowed to come to and get back in, mix in with the wild population.
When it comes to, are they upset that they've been put down for a little bit? Are they out of it? Are they like disoriented?
I never stayed around to find out. No.
You just get up and go.
Right.
But is it like most anesthesia when you kind of are a little loopy when you come out of it and it takes them a minute to...
And that's why you do have to keep an eye on them at least from the helicopter sometimes. They do get upset about the helicopter, and they've learned over the years helicopters
That they don't like
may
them.
have unpleasant consequences.
Right.
Right. So, okay, so this is a baby. This is not one that we would be working with, immobilizing or marking. But I mention this because about 95% of the population on the reserve, which is now about 200 animals, are identifiable as individuals. But a calf like this would not be. But presumably at this age we'd know it from its mother. It'd be close to its mother. And usually after they're a year old, then they may be old enough to, or 2 years, old enough to immobilize and work with and mark.
So you wait for them to be, is it more of an age thing or more of a weight thing?
Well, it's more an age thing.
Okay.
They should be relatively independent from the mother too. So if they do get separated from the mother, it's not a concern.
Okay, okay.
Now this guy is a full adult male, and you can see a little bit of natural tear to his left ear. But the point is, the marking system originally required that scouts get out with binoculars and get close enough to read the notches on the ears. Okay, so we've moved on from that, fortunately, because there are dangers. In this case, a rhino bashed into a fender of a vehicle, got his horn stuck there.
Not happy about the
Not
truck
happy
being
about
there.
it. Took him a little while to get extricated. So we've developed another method for monitoring rhinos, and that's this microlight aircraft. That works pretty good. This actually was paid for by a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but it's very limited. It has to be very good weather conditions to use it.
And usually only like 2 people can go on those at
Yeah,
max.
that's right.
They're not.
And the pilot got good enough that he actually could read those ear notches from the air. But I'm proud to say I introduced a new method for monitoring rhinos, and that are these so-called camera traps, motion-sensitive remote cameras. There's a rhino picked up at night, and you can clearly read identify them from
incredible.
the notches. And for the first time, we were getting information about what rhinos were doing in the dark.
Nice.
There's a porcupine we picked up, lots of
Sneaking
other
around.
interesting pictures. African porcupine, herd of buffalo. In this case, we could see some of them were suffering from a skin mange that indicated maybe they were under poor nutrition. Beautiful aardvark, that AARDVARK animal. And
Wow. look at
African
that.
leopards. And this gave us the first information, clues that there were probably 4 or 5 leopards on the reserve. Fish eagle, in this case it's pecking at a carcass of a warthog. Some guinea fowl that came along and harassed the fish eagle. And surprisingly enough, a hook-lipped rhino came along and sniffed at this carcass too. Didn't seem to eat any of it.
He wasn't interested in it, but he's
Yeah.
checking it out.
Right. Okay, so it's a beautiful rhino population. They're doing very well. That's the success story. This is how the population is increased to 180 or so most recently, doing about as well as rhinos can do, about 5% increase a year. But starting to slow now. Some changes in female reproduction seem to be the younger females not having calves as early as they used to. This is a calf nursing over a year old, which is also very unusual. Okay, so other animals being injured or males being injured or killed in fighting. So that also indicates high density. This one did survive after the vet fixed it up. Vegetation studies that I've been involved in. So looking at that, we also saw rhinos were causing some destruction among preferred plant species. So all that indicated it was time to remove some rhinos from the population, and this was what was intended all along. So this is why it's a success story. Other habitat areas that don't have black rhinos could be restarted there, and even some animals went back to a national park in Zambia where they now had sufficient security in place to protect them. So this allows for genetic mixing, allows for the population of endangered species to continue to thrive. So that's the South African story. I hope you all get a chance to visit South Africa, not only to see the rhinos, but hey, the birding is great too. Thank you.
That was a great slideshow. Those pictures are amazing. I mean, how close you got to those animals it's incredible. I just so that I know for my own, obviously humans are a danger to them. Are wild animals also a threat to the rhinos, or is it mostly just the humans?
No, they don't. In these reserves, of course, occasionally young ones are taken by lions. That would be the only threat, and occasionally in cases of rhinos and elephants mixing it up. But generally, they don't have too many concerns.
Okay, so
other than
mostly just the humans are
Yeah.
really causing the population to go
Right.
down. Well, I appreciate you coming and sharing those amazing pictures with us. I would love to go to South Africa sometime. That is a great place.
I
And
hope you do. Thank you.
I will do my best. That's amazing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching the Nature Here show. And join us again for another episode.